Thank you so much, and welcome everybody to the Supply Chain Insights webinar series. I am Constance Coral, the Director of Marketing with Supply Chain Insights. Today we are presenting the voice of the supply chain based on the same titled Supply Chain Insights research report that is due out in early January. This study on supply chain planning and software is conducted twice a year as we compare the results and discuss the differences. Our speaker today is Laura Cesari, founder of Supply Chain Insights. We are a research firm that helps organizations achieve supply chain excellence. She is also author of the enterprise software blog, supplychainshaman.com, read by over 4,000 global supply chain executives. And certainly an exciting milestone, Laura's first co-authored book, Bricks Matter, will be out next week on December 19th. I have one more item to mention. Our Twitter hashtag for our event today is SCI Webinar. Please feel free to tweet out to your network some fun facts and nuggets of information you may find interesting. And now I would like to welcome Laura Cesari.
Thank you so much, Constance. And before I begin, I want to thank everyone that filled out the survey. It is our mission and charter at Supply Chain Insights to provide open research for supply chain executives. It's our goal to be the place to turn for really objective research around what are the supply chain leaders thinking, where are they investing, and to get the ongoing direction. As Constance says, this is the second time we've done this survey. This is not a sponsored survey. It was done based upon knowledge of supply chain executives. And what we're going to do is we're going to contrast what we see in this most recent study, which we pulled out of the field last week, to the study that we did that was pulled out of the field in May of last year. What we're trying to do is to really understand the trends, to understand the action points and the business pain of the supply chain leader. During the process, we will have polling questions, and we'll be asking people to give us insight into what they think the data means, so we'd like it to be interactive. We will be posting this study on our community. We would love to continue the dialogue there as well. And we'll also have the report coming out in January, and of course, because it's open research, it will be available for everyone to share and to use. So first of all, why did we do this study? Well, current state, to really understand where people are, look at the pain points, the goals, and the issues. We believe that there is an ongoing gap between the importance of supply chain applications and the performance of these applications. I firmly believe we're in the third evolution of supply chain analytics, and that companies that are more mature in their thinking or are the more advanced have an even greater gap. They know that there's a gap, but they really don't know the right words to use. The second thing we wanted to do was to understand where we were on supply chain maturity. So we also asked questions around how do people define the organization, how do they define supply chain excellence, and what were their pain points and their operation trends. And so most of the data you're going to see today came from manufacturers. And if we look at the people that actually responded, you can see that, we had 36% of, in the spring of presidents, in the fall 33% were vice presidents. And we have a very experienced group of respondents. On average, in the spring of the first study, we had an average tenure of 16 years of experience with supply chain management. And in the fall, we had an experience base of 20 years. Now, before I go on, I want to talk a little bit about the panel group, because we do open research and we basically have built a panel group of supply chain leaders, and they voluntarily fill out the survey. When we do this, we know who's responding, but we never share the answers of the respondents. But it's very different than having a blind panel group like the ones I used to have at other research firms, where we never really knew the level of expertise of the respondents. So it's a very experienced group. Next, we ask, do you have a supply chain center of excellence? And you can see that, yes, consistently we see that companies have a supply chain center of excellence. 36% said they're not sure, but we see a growing presence of the supply chain center of excellence. When we look at the definitions of center of excellence, one of the things that we see is this topic around the evaluation of new technologies is growing in the supply chain center of excellence. We didn't see that as much in the earlier data in spring. And in a lot of the dialogue that I'm having with companies today, I'm getting more and more questions about what are those cool technologies out there, Laura, and can you introduce me to those people that are doing cool things? And so I'm starting to see a shift and really a thaw in companies being able to ask the questions about new technologies, particularly new forms of predictive analytics, and to ask the questions around how do they, at a center of excellence level, work with these new technologies. Additionally, if we look at the pain for the company, we see that, the top pain, 78% say that supply chain visibility is a very big pain, and demand volatility is followed shortly thereafter, and supply chain complexity are the big pains that we see in this data from fall of 2012. At the prior study, we saw that commodity prices were really rising to higher in the list, and that we saw more of a concern around product proliferation. Now, we did a study that we presented last week with Supply Chain Brain on talent shortage, and even though I think it's understated in this business pain, I think that one of the issues is that many companies are just really awakening that that is as big of a problem as it is. The supply chain visibility and the need for visualization tools is something that I'm asked a lot. And the term supply chain visibility lacks a common definition across supply chain. There's very different levels of understanding. And so one of the things that I always ask people when they ask me about supply chain visibility is, what do you mean by this? And I get very different answers based upon maturity. And so there's a big issue there, but be careful if you're a vendor of supply chain solutions, tagging something with supply chain visibility as a tag, because it means very different things for different people. Now, when we look at the top 3 elements of business pain for the individual, we see that 43%, and this has actually grown in importance, say that the executive knowledge of the supply chain team is a top business pain. If you remember back in our spring report, this had a lower level of importance, and so we see that it is rising higher in the stack, and the ability to get to the right data in my organization and to have actionable analytics is still very, very prominent. Supply chain finance and the ability to get to financial data is also increasing in business pain. Now, this is the pain for the individual, which is different than the pain that we talked about for the company. So while the company is talking about visibility and demand volatility, the individual is really struggling to help the executive team understand the end-to-end supply chain and to be able to get to the right data in the organization and to get to the actionable analytics. And, we found that in prior studies that only 23% of companies can actually determine profitability easily. So these are not small issues, and they're not issues that were really well addressed at the beginning of the evolution of the analytics. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to do a polling question. If we can back up and if I can ask my moderator to show the polling questions, what we would like to do is we would like to get an answer to our first polling question. And what we would like to do is have the manufacturers answer this question. So can you introduce the question?
Absolutely, Laura. If you'd like to take us back to slide 13, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, folks, in the lower right-hand side of the screen, there is a question that's being asked. And if you could go ahead and just take the time to fill out, of these three, which is your company's primary supply chain pain point? You have 3 questions, and we'll go ahead and leave that open for about 10 more seconds. We'll share the results in about 30 seconds. Back to you, Laura.
Okay, and I would like to limit this to only manufacturers. So if you are a provider of technology, if you can just let others fill this in, and then we will share the response. The other thing is we are going to be looking then at the pain for the individual so that you can contrast it. This is actually the pain for the company, which is, as we had talked about, a very different pain. And I think sometimes we tend to gloss over and mix them up, but the pain for the individual and the pain for the company are very, very different topics. So here we see that 53% say the demand volatility is the largest pain, and the lack of supply chain visibility at 24% is for this particular audience. Both of them are neck and neck. So, I think that, the issue around volatility and visualization are both primary issues. Now let's take our next poll, which is the audience poll number 2, which really looks at what is the pain for the individual. And if we look at this, of these 4, which causes you the most business pain personally when it comes to supply chain management? And again, we have a need for the manufacturers to answer this, or those that are running supply chain teams. You could be a manufacturer, distributor, or retailer. But if those that provide technology could not respond, that way we could be sure we get the answers. So if we can kick off this survey, are we getting the answers here?
Laura, we're having a little bit of a lower start here, so I think people are thinking through this one before they start answering. But folks, just remember, in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, just go ahead and fill in the response to the question that's being asked and just click on Submit. Right now we only have about 20% participating, and we'll leave it open for about another 20 seconds, or about 10 seconds.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. So we'll get those in, and then we'll see what the differences are. What I wanted to do here as an exercise is just have people really start to think about the differences between the pain of the company and the pain of the individual. Because the pain of the individual is often addressed by platforms and types of technology, and the pain of the company is typically addressed by use cases. And so we've got to really work both of these together. So here, getting actionable analytics actually won out, and the second was the executive team knowledge. Both of them are tough issues. Executive team knowledge and the understanding of the supply chain as a system is something that I do a lot of, and something which I'd love to talk to you about more. And actionable analytics really gets to people understanding the evolution of analytics and how they can really move from reporting to dashboards and scorecards to predictive analytics to really be able to drive learning systems and coming up that real continuum of maturity in analytics. So let's continue with the data. So if we look at the survey data and we look at what we found, when we look at supply chain focal points over the next 2 years, when we say, where are you planning to spend your money and your primary focus on supply chain? You can see demand planning in the fall of this year, 83% are very, very focused on demand planning. So it's coming up in terms of importance, and they also really want to save cost. Prior study was a little bit more around shortening cycles, but this whole issue around demand planning and what we can do to build that end-to-end supply chain and reduce the waste in the supply chain is growing in importance. Less important are some of the new product launch, price management issues, in terms of people looking at that for the next year spending. Having a little bit of trouble here with this mouse, so let's go to the open-ended questions. You know, when we ask open-ended questions about challenges and goals, these are some of the answers we got. People want to align metrics and definition across their multiple ERP systems. I think there's a misconception that people have one ERP system. They may have one vendor that provided it, or they may have multiple vendors, but the ability to get information across ERP systems is a big issue for visibility. A better understanding of how to balance the trade-offs, which really get into some of the predictive analytics, and then how can they articulate the supply chain vision to be the best in the world, and then much of the supply chain dynamics, you know, and how do they get at the pain of the dynamics. And so we see a lot of focus around what is supply chain excellence, what is this next generation of predictive analytics. I have more and more companies that are calling me to make those big step changes against the next evolution of supply chain. But they're really struggling with talent, and they need to learn new terms. They need to think about outside in versus inside out, and so this whole area around talent and business leaders. And then, you know, for those that are in specialty retail or even those that are disintermediating in the consumer channel, you know, omni-channel retailing and what that means for the ability to have a perpetual inventory signal across the network with multiple parties and, you know, kind of an enterprise system of record that will allow us to look at how do we do shipments from multiple parties and maintain perpetual inventories in multi-enterprise situations, or how do we have multi-enterprise ATP is a question I'm getting a lot. And then this whole topic around collaboration, you know, but, you know, we just can't work together in our own company, and it gets to the point around, you know, what is supply chain excellence and how do we build those end-to-end systems. So in our studies, we will ask these open-ended questions, and often in the open-ended questions, you start to hear the voice of the supply chain professional. And what you see is that there isn't just one voice, but there are common themes. People really want to understand this issue of a complex system and trade-offs. They're starting to ask questions around new forms of predictive analytics, but there's a huge focus on talent and how they can get to building that next evolution. So we've talked about the supply chain organization. We've talked about supply chain pain and focal points. Now let's talk about IT systems and trends. So as we look at IT systems and trends, when we go back, and I've got to take this back, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble here. Let's go back here to future spending. The good news for people is that 53% of the respondents in our poll say that they will be increasing spending in the 2013 period. Now, I've been an industry analyst for about 8 years, and this is good news for me as people are saying that they are willing to invest in new technologies. You know, 33% say it'll stay the same, but only 13% say it's going to decrease, which I think is optimistic for vendors on the phone that are, you know, waiting for kind of that fall. And I think that, you know, as we put this study in the field, I was worried about what was happening with supply chain spending because of economic issues and pending recession and, you know, some of the issues that are happening in Europe. And so the fact that we are seeing 53% increased spending, I think, is a good sign. So as we look at the next slide in the audience poll, for the manufacturers on the phone, when you think about your 2013 budget versus 2012, do you expect your company spending on supply chain to increase, stay the same, or decrease? And remember, we have this in the bottom corner. So if you could just walk us through those procedures again.
Absolutely. Down in the lower right-hand corner, you should see the question, compared to 2012, do you expect your company's spending on supply chain technology in 2013 to 1, increase, stay the same, or decrease? Just go ahead and fill in one of the three. Click Submit, and we'll share those results in approximately 20 seconds.
Okay, so I'm sure the vendors on the phone have their fingers crossed that the answers will be an increase like we saw in the study, but we'll see here as the results come in. And, you know, as I talk to people about why they're increasing spending with this demand volatility and the greater complexity, you know, it really gets down to the fact that the business pain with, you know, what we're doing in global markets, what we're doing in, you know, outside-in processes, what we're doing in proliferation of products, that the old systems just aren't responsive enough. So we see a tie. 45% say they're going to increase, 45% say they're going to stay the same, 9% say they're going to decrease. So that's fairly consistent with what we're seeing in the formal quantitative study results. Now, as we continue on and we look at the current state of IT systems, one of the issues that I think a lot of people have that are new to supply chain is they say, well, didn't we do this all in, you know, the average company from our study has 150 systems. Why do people need to invest in systems? And you can see that we have a lot of systems. You know, while the purple bar represents one system and the green bar represents two systems, and then you see three systems, and then the red represents any system. Because if you can see that most companies have systems, but on average, they've got more than one system for any type of application. And with mergers and acquisitions that have happened across the years, this has gotten very, very muddy. But more importantly, these systems were implemented assuming that we had best practices and processes, and they were implemented with more of a functional, siloed approach. So as we look at why do we have such gaps in order management or enterprise resource planning or demand planning, you know, one of the things I want to challenge people to think about is that we implemented them assuming that we were going to drive a very supply-centric response. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, demand planning was typically implemented to basically say, how do I predict what manufacturing should make? Not necessarily what is the channel going to sell. And as we look at enterprise resource planning or we look at order management, one of the issues is that that was really based upon more of a siloed thinking, not really looking at cross-functional processes. And so as we move to this next generation where the metronome of the supply chain is speeding up and the processes are moving from inside out to outside in, there's a need for us to rethink these old systems that we've put in and to think about how we retool them and redesign them so we can be outside in, so that we can shorten the latency of data and improve our ability to use predictive analytics and cross-functional sensing mechanisms and also market-to-market sensing. Now, when we look at the current gap of the current applications, enterprise resource planning is both important and has the greatest gap. The next is order management, followed by demand planning, followed by production planning, manufacturing execution systems, and then people are happier with warehouse management and transportation management. The supply chain execution systems, people generally feel do a much better job. But, you know, what we called APS, or Advanced Planning Systems, in the area of demand, which was very important, satisfaction there at gap of 27%. The gap is not as big as we see in supply planning, but the importance is growing higher. But you might say, well, why is enterprise resource planning and order management that we've been doing for so long, why is that gap so big? And I think the gap is very large because of three factors. One, we implemented a lot of these technologies early, back when we were really trying to rush to get them in. Maybe it was at Y2K, or maybe it was because we had a project that we had to get done. Second thing is we've gone global, and we may not have redesigned it for global functionality or thought about regional global governance. And the third thing is that we often would have multiple systems, and we assumed that we knew best practices, but we really didn't design them for cross-functional and to be able to look at what was happening. Now, when we look at this current satisfaction with transportation, with technology systems, you know, you can see that the satisfaction with IT systems that, again, transportation people are the most satisfied with, then transportation, and then order management, a little bigger gap here in demand planning in terms of the fall versus the spring. And so this is what the studies look like when we compare the spring and the fall studies. So as we continue here and we think about this, I think we can say that, you know, the warehouse management, the transportation management systems, people are happier with. We're rethinking the transactional system, and we're getting ready for this next generation of predictive analytics. So let's look at the top three trends. When we say to folks, what are you excited about? You know, what, you know, you're not only investing more money, but what are you excited about? And we look at the spring of 2012 versus the fall of 2012. You can see the demand sensing is still very high. Sales and operations planning is growing slightly. Data visualization is starting to grow even more as people are starting to look at supply chain visibility and multi-tier as they look at corporate social responsibility. Big data is out there, but right now it's a lot more words and it's a lot more talk than it's actually taken form. But, you know, as I look at big data supply chains, particularly at the digital manufacturing and the inter-enterprise supply chain traceability problem, big data supply chains, I think in the next year will take on more momentum. Mobility went down a little bit, but, you know, I still hear a lot about it, and there is, in this particular study, more focus on supply sensing. So what does supply sensing mean? Supply sensing is the ability to sense commodity market changes and translate them and orchestrate them across the organization, and also to sense the health and the conditions of a supplier as we deal with the fact that audits are not sufficient, and the ability to sense risk and to move it across the database. Now, we also added in this survey cloud-based applications to be able to look at the use of cloud-based apps, and you can see that while people are getting more open to cloud-based applications, that you know, it's not as high as some of the trends that we see for demand planning or sales and operations planning. So let's look at the future focus. You know, when we asked open-ended and we said, you know, when you're looking at 2013, these are open-ended responses. We really didn't clean them up. I just wanted you to get a feeling for what we got. You know, I think it's pretty typical of some of the quantitative, you know, investigation here. You know, at first is demand, 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 and it isn't the traditional demand forecasting system. It's really looking at demand sensing, the use of structured and unstructured data, predictive analytics, outside in, pattern recognition, attribute-based forecasting, and building demand analytics that can cross the entire organization. Just not demand to forecast what manufacturing is going to sell, but to look at demand as we look at sensing channel needs and translating this. Now, if we look at ERP, we've still got a lot of ERP that's happening. You know, we're on multi-year rollouts, so you see continued deployment, adding analytics and better visualization on top of ERP, and then really being able to finish what they've started. Now, sales and operations planning, it's still, how do we rise above and try to get that more holistic view of sales and operations planning. I find a lot of people have found that they've implemented sales and operations planning without the rigor of analyzing forecastability or forecast value add or putting in the tools for mix and variance optimization, or they find that they've got multiple S&OP systems, or they have multiple systems, as we showed before, and we see S&OP, and particularly in a cloud-based application, is growing in importance. SAP, for this particular audience, is primarily process-based, came up a lot as a keyword, and you can see a little bit around SAP. And then if we look at other, we're looking at visibility, cloud-based solutions, a lot of sensing. So overall, demand, sensing, the ability to improve visualization, all key themes as we think about the voice of the supply chain and the next step. So we've talked about the supply chain organization, supply chain pain and focal points, IT systems and trends. And just to reiterate, we have posted this particular presentation on SlideShare, and we also have put it into our community. We'd love to have you continue the discussion there. The good news is that we are increasing the spending in supply chain, starting to change the focus. I think we're on to our third generation of technologies, which are really going back to deeper analytics. And, as we think about this third generation of supply chain analytics, I keep remembering the words of the supply chain pioneers that said we had to learn from these three generations, to unlearn, to start to relearn. And a lot of that relearning comes with learning new terms, thinking outside in versus inside out. And, as we start to increase spending, I'm not sure that where we're spending the money in the application investment areas, that it is aligned with the gaps that we see. And what do I mean by that? A lot of focus on improving demand, but a lot of pressure on cost. And I find that many times people will implement demand systems, but not necessarily use the better output. And so my caution is that, as we design and redesign these demand systems to sense and translate, we have to really be looking at the systems of supply to say, can we use that data, and how do we use that data, and how do we really repurpose the data to be sure that we can maximize the use. So many times I see that companies will implement in demand and not really use it in supply. And I think we need to continue to hammer on what drives supply chain excellence. It sounds simple. I want to really drive a much better supply chain. But when I ask people about what drives supply chain excellence for them, they often will come away saying that they're not clear and they're not aligned, they don't really understand how to make trade-offs, they don't have visibility to data to be sure that they made the right trade-off. And I think the execution of the supply chain strategy to be able to help the management team really understand supply chain excellence continues to be a barrier. So Constance, that's what we see at a high level in the study. Do we have any questions?
We have a couple of questions, and just a reminder that please go to the chat window and chat any questions you have to panelists, and we'd be happy to go over anything that you have, any insight, any questions, feel free to do that. So Laura, I'm just going to start off with a general question. Were you surprised by any of the data?
I was a little surprised by the increase in spending. With a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in the market around the downturn in the market. When we entered into periods of recession before in studies, which we're not sure if we're in a recession, but people are certainly tightening their belt, we have seen sometimes a downturn in spending. So in my own mind, Constance, I was wondering what's going to happen in 2013. The other thing is I continue to reflect on people push into the demand area. You know, one of the friction points we have in this whole supply chain is, you know, really building that end-to-end supply chain and having an end-to-end leader and being able to push across sales to be able to drive that focus. And so, you know, I'm reinforced that we're continuing to see the interest in the demand app.
Great. So what excites you for 2013? What do you hope companies will adopt as New Year's resolutions?
You know, I'm hoping they adopt a New Year's resolution to think differently. I think the road that brought us here on supply chain is not the road that is going to move us forward in what I call the race for 2020. You know, it's sort of like moving from an analog to a digital world. You know, we built a supply chain based upon orders and shipments as primary inputs, and that data has latency, and we haven't really rethought what the supply chain can be like in a digital world where, you know, we are, you know, scheduling manufacturing based not just on time or mean time failure, but really looking at sensing machine to machine and manufacturing, or where we can use unstructured data and social data and demand insights and market data, and we can use that on the demand side outside in, but also on the supplier side. You know, as we think about the fact that the supply chains have become more outsourced and they've become much more complex, we've got to be able to sense what's happening in the supply chain on both the demand and the supply side. And I think that older technologies didn't allow us to do that, but now we can. And so I think one of the New Year's resolutions I'd like for people to have is to really think about how they can better sense, which means, you know, how can they take some effort and really think about the use of new types of technologies to sense, which on the demand side would be the use of sentiment analysis or text mining or social listening, or the ability to build rules-based ontologies for learning. On the supplier side, it's the ability to, again, do supplier sensing for risk on text mining, pattern recognition, and to use some of the more advanced predictive analytics to do that. You know, we're not all the way there yet, but I think that those are early technologies to help us inform the path of the future so that supply chains just don't respond, that they sense and then drive an intelligent response. Does that help?
That's great. That's great, Laura. Another question, we mentioned talent. You know, do you have any suggestions to address the talent shortage? How do we train, hire supply chain professionals?
You know, I'm having some great discussions with supply chain leaders about that. And I think one of the things we've got to do is we've got to realize that schools will not give us the level of talent that we need. And we can't just assume we're going to retread people, swapping them from, you know, company to company. The companies really need to invest in building talent. And I think high potential programs where we have experiential learning around what drives supply chain excellence is something that offers a lot of promise. I also think taking employees from areas where maybe we have more employees than we need, like one of my clients is doing this with customer service, some are doing with sales and operations types of people, where we can take people in the organization that maybe want a new set of challenges but understand the products, and we actually invest in sending them to school to understand supply chain, giving them some on-the-skill training, and to be able to build understanding of demand and supply. The other thing, though, that we found in the talent study, Constance, which you know well and we've posted online, is 3 ingredients which most companies are missing is cross-training, clear job identification, and then the ability to really help people with new opportunities and on-the-job training. And I think thinking about those systemically is a good place to start.
Great. Well, certainly helps for the New Year's resolutions right there, some ideas. Okay, we mentioned supply chain visibility, and you asked folks out in the field what their definition is. So The folks here want to know what your definition is.
You know, I find that companies vary greatly, and I have a maturity model on this if anybody wants to have a copy. You know, the first question they ask is, where's my stuff? They want to track and trace their stuff. And that assumes that they know what they want to track and they want to know what they want to trace. And this often it will happen in the logistics function. And then the next is early exception reporting, which is the kind of the next maturation of that kind of visibility, which is give me early alerts and early warning if my stuff isn't going to get to the right point at the right time. And the ability to really have that exception management. And then the next level is predictive analytics, which allow me to have early warning systems on potential problems, even before I ship goods, that say, you know, these potential conditions tell me you may be having a problem here. So, you know, it might be, you know, sensing on shipping patterns in certain lanes or looking at plant reliability. But it's the ability to have early warning on conditions, just not on shipments, and to be able to do predictive analytics on that. So we have a continuum of ability to get early warning to insights in the evolution of supply chain visibility. One of the difficulties is, you know, we throw these words around like supply chain visibility or supply chain control tower, and we think we know what they mean, but we don't really sit down and give a clear definition. And I would encourage everybody to do that.
Great, Laura. Well, it looks like we are good with the questions right now. Was there anything else you wanted to cover, Laura, in our last couple of minutes here?
Yeah, I wanted to, first of all, thank people for respondents. You know, we really work based upon people filling out our surveys. We really appreciate everyone that's helped us this year. It's hard for me to believe I started this company in February, and we've published 19 reports. And we've got an exciting year planned for 2013, and so I just want to thank everyone that's filled out the surveys and, you know, wish them a good year. The other thing is I want to continue to invite people to join the Supply Chain Insights community. This is an old visualization of the community. It showed 230, but yesterday I was on the community and it's 460 people. On the community, we have the ability for people to rate software and also consulting, share their experience. We'd like this to be the conversation starter for supply chain professionals. We also put all of our research reports in this community, and people have the ability to get financial ratio benchmarking and also access our Wikipedia that we've put in. And so I want to encourage people to continue the conversation here. And I think, Constance, you have a Twitter hashtag that you'd like for people to continue the conversation on Twitter.
I certainly do. And on behalf of my whole team, I want to wish everybody a great holiday season and new year. Our hashtag to continue this conversation is SCI Webinar on Twitter. And we have a commitment to monthly webinars. We have an exciting webinar coming up in the new year, January 10th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. It is based on the newly published book by Laura Cesari and Charles Chase, Bricks Matter, the role of supply chains in building market-driven differentiation. So we hope to see you there. That's it for now. Again, happy holidays, everyone. Thank you so much for participating, and we see you in the new year. Have a great day.